There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Matthew. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And the truth is, we can have the same problem where we can know everything about Jesus and we can think we know Him. And that's because we grew up in the church, where we've heard about Jesus our whole lives and where we won't see Him for who He really is. And it's because we're immune to it. And so we minimize Him. So we don't see His power. And we minimize His power to actually work in our very own lives. And it's just like they did right here. Because it says right here, He didn't do many works there because of their unbelief. But if you had asked any of these people and you said, "Do you know Jesus?" They would have answered, "Yes, oh yes, I know Jesus. He's the carpenter's son." But if you asked, do you know Jesus as the Son of God, who can do all things, who knows all things, who loves you with all His heart? Do you know Him, the creator of the world? Or have you been inoculated against knowing Jesus, where you only know Him just enough so that you never catch the whole disease of knowing Him with your whole being, where you can surrender to Him and you can see Him doing His work in your own personal life, where He has that power in your very own circumstances, and He has that power to do it today, to do it right now in whatever you're going through. Because His people, the people of Nazareth, they didn't. And His own family, they didn't. They thought that it was just a bunch of crazy talk. And so Jesus now, He says, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own home. And so here we shouldn't really be surprised that when we go to Thanksgiving dinner and you try to witness to your Uncle Ken about what Jesus is doing in your life, and he just laughs at you. And he talks about when you were 5 years old and you ran around like an idiot and you had ice cream all over your face and you're wiping it on your shirt. Well, the reason he does that is because he's too familiar with you to listen to you when you share God's word. And that's what the definition of a prophet is. A prophet is someone who speaks God's words. But just like Jesus, it shouldn't stop you from trying, even if they won't listen. Because someday something may happen when they will listen. There will be a day maybe when they have a real need. Just like Jesus's brothers, James and Jude, because Jesus's brothers, they both became Christians and they both wrote books in the Bible. All right, so now we're going to start chapter 14, and we know from the other gospel accounts that this is around the Passover. This is 1 year before Jesus is going to be crucified. And we have here Herod Antipas, and we talked about him a lot before, and now he has just killed John the Baptist, and now he's hearing all these reports of all the miracles being done by Jesus. And this is all because of his guilt, because now he believes that Jesus is John the Baptist risen from the dead. And Herod, he has no reason to believe this, because Herod, he had aligned himself with the Sadducees. And the Sadducees, they didn't believe in a resurrection of the dead. So Herod's belief here is caused by his guilt and probably a little bit about Greek mythology, because the Greeks did believe if someone was raised from the dead, they would have miraculous powers working through them. But there's never ever a report that John the Baptist did any miracles at all in his ministry. Though we already knew that John was in prison, now we're going to get the details of his death. And even though it says here that Herod, that he wanted to put John to death,
but was afraid to. From the other accounts we read, we know that Herod, that he liked visiting John and he liked talking to John. And he thought of him as a prophet and as a righteous man. And Herod, though he may have been the ruler of Galilee and he may have been the head of Galilee, but it was his incestuous wife Herodias who was the neck that turned that head. Because Herod, he was a very weak man. And right here in verse 3, it says that Herod imprisoned John for the sake of Herodias. So it's her fault that John is imprisoned. And now we get to see how Herodias' evil plot unfolds and how Herodias is even willing to use her own teenage daughter to seek revenge against John and to destroy and murder her accuser because he had been accusing her of being an adulteress. Now, Herodias' daughter, her name was Salome, and we know this because of Josephus. He was a trustworthy Jewish historian. And she is actually the biological daughter of Philip, Herod Antipas's brother. And so that means this woman, this girl, she's also Herod's niece. And she didn't end up really being much different than her own mother because she also ends up marrying later on a different Herod, a relative. And then she even leaves that marriage to marry another relative of Herod. But our Herod Antipas here, he's much more afraid of his wife Herodias than he was ever afraid of John the Baptist. And now Herodias, for her to be able to carry out her premeditated plot against John to kill him, she had to wait until Herod's birthday party. And this birthday party for Herod was somewhere in his mid-50s. And Herodias, what she did is she went out and she invited all the right guests, all the people who ruled. So these are the people that he had political dealings with, and the who's of Galilee, the people in power, the people that you'd have to know to get ahead in life. And so it's not much different than our politics today. And all these people are people that Herod would have to show himself to be able to keep his word in front of, to be able to save face. So they're all out there. And they're celebrating down in southern Israel where it's warm. They're all out there by the Dead Sea in the Fort Machaerus, which is probably like a winter resort. And Herodias, well, she knew men and she knew how to use men. You have to remember, she's already switched sides from one marriage to one brother to go to the other brother. And this is all done for her own political advantage. Because at this time, Herod Antipas, he was trying to get the title of being king by appealing to Caesar. And Herodias, she wanted to be a queen, and she knew her husband well. And so she played him like a fiddle. And she was probably playing something like The Devil Went Down to Georgia. And so then the trap is set. She has all the right political people and all the booze, and it's his birthday, and she knows everyone will be drunk. And then she planned her big surprise, the perfect surprise for an immoral ruler and his friends, the strippers, and not just any stripper, but her own teenage daughter, Herod's very own niece. And Herod, he has no morals. When it comes to relatives, and he may have already been looking at her. And Salome, she would have been taught this dance to be able to inflame the lusts of all these men there. And it would have been all at her mother's direction. And Herodias, she knew her husband really well. She knew that when he was full of booze and that he was inflamed in lust, and that he was such an indulgent bragger, she knew that Herod would make some kind of great boast, the kind of a boast that a king would make, that he would maybe offer up to like half of his kingdom. But the truth is Herod, he didn't have a kingdom to offer because the kingdom belonged to Rome. But Herodias, she planned this whole thing. And we know that she did, and we know that this is true because it says it right there. It says, so she, having been prompted by her mother, and is talking about Salome, that she had been prompted by her. So she had already been told what to ask for before she ever danced, because there couldn't be any hesitation. She had to ask for John the Baptist to be killed immediately, right away, so that Herod, he couldn't recant on his stupid oath, which he should have done. But Herodias, she knew him too well. She knew he was too much of a big shot to go back on his word in front of all these people. He had to impress him. And it's not because he's a man of his word, because he's not. And it wasn't just bad enough to have John the Baptist killed. Herodias had to have his head on a platter so she could walk around with it and show all the guests as if it was some kind of a trophy, where she could boast about it, where she could say, I won, and this is going to happen to anyone who would ever accuse me of any wrongdoing. And so Herod's birthday is the day of John's death. And I never want to ever go to a party like Herod's, although the rest of the world, they may disagree with me, because it really doesn't matter about who's who. But the reason is because people do stupid things when they're drunk. And then when you throw lust on top of it, it destroys people's lives. And we've all seen this in people's lives, or if you haven't, you've at least seen it on TV. And so now you can understand why Herod, he'd have such guilt, and that it would be really hard for him not to get that image out of his head. That's a birthday that Herod probably won't soon forget. And so now you can see why Herod would have had all these crazy ideas about John coming back from the dead. But these people, these wicked people, they weren't even worth being in the presence of John the Baptist. And you have to remember, John the Baptist, he's only about 32 years old here. And Jesus had already told us that there has never been anyone born any greater than John. And so now John, his disciples, they come and they take his body to be buried. And then they travel about 90 miles to go tell Jesus. And so that would have taken them about 5 days to a week to get there. And I wonder if these are the same disciples that brought Jesus that message when John was doubting of Jesus being the Christ. And when that message actually did go back from Jesus to John, that if that message actually was able to sustain him until Herod took his life. And you have to know that the news of John's death affected Jesus, where he would want to get alone and away with his disciples. Because all these guys, they were friends. They all knew each other. And John was Jesus's cousin. And so now they take this boat and they go to a deserted place. But when you take a boat on the Lake of Galilee, the crowd, they can see where the boat's going. And so what they do is they all run along the shoreline to get to the area that they're headed. And so we read this and it looks like Jesus is alone and he's with his disciples and he just kind of suddenly turns around and the crowd, they're all there.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.